PGA DFS is finally back. My name is Jordan Chan. I'm the head coach here at SaberSim, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to beat golf DFS for the 2024 season. Whether you are brand new to golf DFS or you've been playing for a while and just want a little bit of a refresher, this is going to be a great resource for you to get ready and amped up for the start of the year. I'll walk through exactly how I build my golf DFS lineups on SaberSim every single week. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Now, for the purposes of today's video, I am going to be focusing more on the classic main slates for PGA DFS. Showdowns are awesome game types to play in this particular sport. I play them most weeks. The strategy between the two is actually pretty similar. It's more similar than it is in other sports like NBA or NFL Showdown, but I'm going to be releasing other Showdown-specific videos later in the year, so we're focusing mostly on classic strategy here. Now, as with any other DFS sport, the absolute most important thing you can be doing to be successful is using strong bankroll management and contest selection principles. So if you're following the DFS profit plan, which is our recommended framework for that, keep going when you're playing golf DFS. And if you've never heard of the DFS profit plan, you should go watch that video first. Make sure your contest selection and bankroll management principles for any sport you play are tight, then come back and get ready for the golf season with this video. You can find it in the description of this video here. It's also available on our YouTube channel here, right here. Start winning more with the DFS profit plan. Now, part of the reason why contest selection and bankroll management are especially important in golf DFS is because this is one of the higher variance sports out there, particularly because of the cut. Each week, golfers will tee off most of the time on Thursday and play through Sunday with a cut of part of the field being removed from the rest of the tournament after the Friday round is over. Now, imagine for NFL, for example, if your running back that you used in 60% of your lineups has a bad first half and as a result just gets cut from the rest of the game. That's basically the impact of the cut on golf DFS, where distributions get pretty unique because in certain outcomes for a given tournament, some golfers just aren't going to get to play all 4 rounds. Now, this isn't true of every golf tournament all year. There are no-cut events, and if you're watching this the day or the week this video came out, the first event of the year, the Century, is a no-cut tournament, so there are no cuts. But I've got Max Homa's distribution pulled up from a random tournament earlier last summer, and you can see what I'm talking about here. You get this bimodal distribution where a given golfer will have a range of outcomes where the golfer misses the cut, and then also a range of outcomes where the golfer makes the cut, and that's where those big ceiling outcomes are. Now, even the best golfers in the world will generally have a meaningful chance of missing the cut on any given tournament, and a lot of the bread and butter plays that make up a lot of the golfers in your lineups are going to have a decent chance to miss the cut on any given week. In particular, value plays have a very decent chance of missing the cut. Most of the time, these golfers will end up showing up in quite a few lineups because their expectation on average for the tournament is relatively high relative to their salary. But if we look again for this random golf tournament from last year, a guy like Ryan Fox, who was clearly underpriced relative to his expectation, had only a 1 in 3, about a 1 in 3 chance of missing the cut. So it's going to happen very often. Again, you end up with this higher variance game. Part of the reason this ends up creating so much variance in golf is a lot of times you need, actually pretty much all the time, you need 6 of your 6 golfers in a given lineup to get through the cut to make it, to have that lineup have any chance of having a top 1 or top 0.1% finish. Now, this ultimately makes golf DFS a really fun sweat, especially on Friday afternoons as the cut is approaching. It's a lot of fun to be looking at your lineups, seeing how your given golfers are performing, and trying to figure out about how many lineups you're going to get through with 6 of 6 golfers making the cut. So what's our formula for success when it comes to beating golf DFS? Well, really there's 3 steps. The first is to build a set of high upside lineups that are capable of pushing 6 of 6 golfers over the cut line and then landing multiple golfers in the top 5, maybe having the winner of the tournament, multiple golfers in the top 10, a lineup that is capable of producing a high upside outcome. Then the second step is to score or grade those lineups to identify which ones are the most profitable ones you can play. How often are they having those high upside outcomes, and how much money are you winning when they get there? And finally, the last step is to select a diversified portfolio of lineups from that pool. We want to mitigate the losses when we're not having a good slate, and we want to diversify and give ourselves as many shots on goal with different types of lineup constructions for any given slate. Another important piece of the puzzle here is to have reasonable expectations of what winning will look like over the course of the golf season. DFS is not about consistency, especially when you're focusing on GPPs. You want to be consistent in your process, but it's not reasonable to expect consistent results. Having a profitable golf season does not look like having small wins every single tournament week by week. You're going to be treading water and probably just straight up losing most weeks of the season, and then you'll have most of your profit come on 1 or 2, or if you're lucky, 3 big tournaments throughout the year where you take down that top 0.1% finish, make all of your profit, and recoup your losses there. If you're hoping to find a game type where you can have consistent returns, where you're being profitable each time you play, GPPs and especially golf GPPs are not going to be for you. So let's actually start building some lineups on SaberSim, and I'll walk through how I apply my 3 steps of the formula to build my lineups each week. First, some practical stuff here. Golf DFS is nice in that there's not a ton of late-breaking news, and there's generally not a lot of change to the projections or the ownership projections throughout the week. Most of the time, SaberSim's early projections will be up on Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning, and barring a withdrawal or significant weather, which I'll talk about here in a second, the projections are about going to be what they are, which means you have plenty of time to build your lineups, tinker, do research, all of that good stuff. Now let's start building some lineups here, and remember that the first step of the formula here is to build a pool of lineups with upside. SaberSim makes this very easy because each lineup built on SaberSim is using our hole-by-hole tournament simulations for that week's tournament. Anytime you press build and build lineups on SaberSim, each lineup you get out on the other side is the best possible lineup, the optimal for how a given tournament or set of tournament sims could have played out. As I mentioned before, because of the unique distributions of players in Golf DFS, average projections alone are not very indicative of lineups that have upside or lineups that are capable of winning. So our tournament level simulations here, when you build lineups with SaberSim, knowing that each of your lineups is the optimal for an actual way that the slate could play out, means that we're essentially automating the work of getting that pool of lineups we need then to select the lineups we're going to play from. So I'm going to go ahead and do this here, and all I'm going to do is make 2 changes to player projections, so I'm abiding by the DraftKings compliance rules, and I'm going to build for a 150 max tournament here and assume that we're building for a relatively large tournament, something, maybe like the flagship tournament here. So we're going to go ahead and build, and what SaberSim's going to do behind the scenes here is essentially simulate out this tournament 5,000 times, giving us the best possible lineup that could have been played for each of those given simulations. Now that we have our pool of lineups built here, the next step is to score those lineups and rank them to identify what the best ones are to play in our contests. If you're on the SaberSim Ultimate plan, this is where you'll use contest sims to simulate the performance of these lineups in the contest you intend to play. But if you're not on SaberSim Ultimate, that's fine too. We have another great way to identify the best lineups to play. First, for SaberSim Ultimate, what we need to do is identify what contest we're playing here. So I'll click the Contest tab, and for the purposes of this video here, I'm going to just go to the All Contests section and assume that we are building for, let's say, the flagship GPP, the $20 150 max contest. I'll right-click it, add the contest sim, which is going to pull in the correct settings here that match up to what this contest looks like, allowing us to run a contest simulation. So I'll go ahead here and click Contest Sim Settings, identify for SaberSim that this is the contest we want to simulate. And now what we're going to do is see how do these lineups actually perform in this particular contest. Where this is really useful for golf is picking up on ownership. We're not only going to identify what lineups have a good chance of getting 6 of 6 across the cut line, what lineups have a lot of upside, but what lineups are going to do it at low ownership. So when that lineup is getting to its upside outcomes, it's not sharing the pot or competing with a bunch of other lineups that are there with it. So we'll give this just a second to run and take a look at what we get on the other side. Now our contest sim is finished, so the next step here would be to sort our lineups by the risk-adjusted return on investment of these lineups. This is taking into account both the upside of the lineup performing well and the downside of the lineup not cashing or failing to hit the cash line at all to give us the best overall sense of what the best lineups are in our pool. One other thing I do like to do here when using contest sims is just quickly filter out the unprofitable lineups completely, just so as we're moving along with the rest of our process, we don't accidentally stick a lineup with a sub 0% ROI into our lineup set. So now what we've done is we've built 5,000 different lineups built on tournament simulations of the Century Tournament here, and then we've tested them in 100,000 simulations of the flagship GPP to see which ones are performing the best in our contest contest simulations. We've basically completed the first 2 steps here. Now, if you don't have SaberSim Ultimate, that's totally fine. What you'll do instead is you'll be sorting using SaberScore. And what SaberScore is it is essentially a generalized version of contest sims. So it uses contest sims to identify in general for a given contest size and a given sport, what are the traits of lineups that grade out well in contest sims? How important is projection? How important is upside? And how important is ownership here? And you'll see, sorting by SaberScore here, we are still seeing high ROI lineups popping up in our top lineups. So SaberScore is still going to do a good job of identifying the best lineups to play from our pool. It just is not going to precisely identify the exact best lineups to play from your pool. So either way, SaberScore or Contest Sims and Ultimate, you're going to get a good value of identifying what the best possible lineups are to play. You're going to get a little more precision and accuracy when you're using Contest Sims to identify the exact best possible lineups. So now the last step here, as I mentioned before, is to create a diversified portfolio of lineups that we ultimately want to take with us into our contest here. We don't necessarily want to go all in on a handful of plays. We don't want to maximize upside at all costs. We want to balance risk management with upside in our portfolio. Now we're going to do that a little bit here already using the contest sims because we're sorting by risk-adjusted ROI. That's going to basically, with 2 lineups that otherwise have a similar upside, choose the one that is a little less risky. But we also want to manage our risk at the portfolio level. If SaberSim says that the best way to play a slate is to go 100% all in on a golfer or 2, that's the way to maximize ROI. Well, that might be a little bit too risky, and we might be able to trade off a lot of risk for while sacrificing very little upside by diversifying our portfolio. That's the idea here. And the best tool to do that is with min uniques. It's going to force your lineups to be X players different from one another, where X is this number. The way I typically recommend most people do this here across all sports is figuring out what's the actual maximum number you could set this to while still getting the number of lineups you need. So if we test this out here, if we crank this up to 3, we're still getting 150 back, which is great. If we crank this up to 4, we're only getting 58 back. So let's go back to 3. 3 is our max here for a 150 max tournament. That's the highest we could go. I typically recommend in golf going 1 less than the maximum number here that you can. So for this particular tournament here, we would use 2 min uniques, having 2 unique golfers in each lineup. And we actually see that our worst lineup in our set of 150 is actually only lineup 245 out of 3392 here, with a very high sim ROI, still 444%. But what this has done is it has smoothed out our exposures pretty significantly here. We still have a few golfers that we're very high on relative to the field, but we're much smoother overall with our exposure curve here, and we're taking on a little bit less risk there while sacrificing very little by way of ROI. As you are playing less and less lineups, you'll have the ability to diversify more, and you should. If we were only playing 20 lineups out of this pool, well, our maximum min uniques here would actually be 4, which means we could use 1 less than the max, go to 3, and play a more diversified set. In this case, with just 20 lineups, we like A-Bird quite a bit here, but we've diversified the rest of our golfers well, and we are only at lineup 40 here out of our pool. So diversification is an important part of this process here to help make sure that we are balancing both risk and upside in our lineup portfolio. Now at this point, we've followed the formula to build winning DFS lineups. And in fact, a lot of times my process for a given tournament looks exactly like this. I would be completely happy and ready to enter these particular lineups into a given slate. But of course, there is opportunity to add a little bit of additional value with some adjustments, maybe our own research. So let's talk about that next. Once we've gotten to this step, this is a good opportunity to apply your own research or opinions or takes on the tournament if you have them. If you don't, that's totally fine. If you do, this is where you want to start plugging that in. Now, rather than trying to have an opinion on every single golfer on this slate and make an adjustment to every single player, I'm going to give you some hints on who to look into for a given tournament and what to look into for those golfers. What I typically recommend people do is look at their highest and lowest leverage golfers, which is your current exposure minus the ownership projection to that particular golfer. These are the golfers that really are poised to most help or hurt you on a given slate. Your most positive leveraged golfers are your biggest positive stands. We're going to have a good tournament here if Cameron Davis, Russell Henley, and Aberg here all have good tournaments. On the flip side, our highest negative leverage are our biggest fades. Patrick Cantlay, Nick Taylor, Max Homa, Siwoo Kim. These are all golfers that are poised to hurt us quite a bit if they end up having a good tournament because they are owned in a greater proportion of the field's lineups than they are in our lineups. So another way of thinking about these are the strongest stands that the SaberSim sims have on the slate. That's how we've built our lineup so far. We've built lineups using SaberSim sims of the tournament, compared them to what we expect the fields to look like to identify the best possible lineups. Now that doesn't necessarily mean our sims are perfect, of course. So as you are thinking about who do you want to do some research on, who do you want to look into, who do you want to keep your ears and eyes open to as you're reading articles, watching videos, listening to podcasts, getting ready for the slate, they should be the players here that are popping the most in the leverage column. So what I typically recommend doing is when the initial SaberSim sims show up on Tuesday mornings most weeks, run through this process and get through a sense of which golfers here we like the most. And then as you're preparing and as the slate is approaching through the rest of the day, Tuesday and Wednesday, and you're getting ready for that final build that I typically run on Wednesday night, keep an eye out for those golfers and see if there are other fantasy analysts that you trust or PGA DFS experts, see what they think about these particular golfers. So rather than trying to figure out how you're going to attack a 60 or 100 golfer pool, figure out who maybe the top 4 or 5 positive and negative leverage golfers are in your pool and jot them down and take notes and remember that those are the golfers that will be your biggest stands if you make no changes here. When it comes to actually making the adjustments after you've done some research and you want to make some changes to your build here, what I recommend doing is making adjustments to min and max exposure here. Now, the easiest way to think about this, or a way to simplify this part of the process, is to break things up into either being half the field on a golfer, even with the field on a golfer, or 2x the field on a golfer. And if you want to get more or less exposure to a particular golfer, just move to the next nearest breakpoint there in the right direction. Now, that might sound a little confusing. It's simpler than it sounds. I'll just give you an example. Let's say I've decided that I want to be a little bit lower on Aberg here. I don't want him to be my top overall stand on the slate here. My research leads me to believe that we're a little bit over projecting him, for example. I'm at 61% exposure right now. His ownership projection is 17%. The next closest breakpoint in the direction that I want to move would be being 2x the field. So I'm going to bring my exposure down instead here to 2x the field to 34% exposure, which will sort through and find a new set of 150 lineups with 2 min uniques sorted by risk-adjusted ROI, but where Aberg only appears in 34% of lineups. It is sometimes useful here to also look at your pool exposure, which will give you a sense of how many lineups in your entire pool contain a particular player. This is really useful, especially as you start looking at your negative leverage golfers here. Let's say I wanted to do a similar thing with Patrick Cantlay here. He's going to be 40% owned. I have 21% exposure, so I'm right around that half the field mark at the moment, but I don't want this to be a golfer that can completely crush me on the slate. I would rather be even with the field on Cantlay and get different elsewhere. Well, I can see I have 15% of my pool, 518 lineups here that contain Patrick Cantlay, so it's probably pretty easy for me to get up and match the field here and set a min exposure of equal to 40 here. And we can see now, if we look at our exposure, he's actually our most owned golfer here, and we were able to get there. So we're even with the field now on Cantlay. But if we go back and look at the negative leverage plays again, if I wanted to do the same thing with Nick Taylor here, you see I only have 5 lineups total in my pool that even contain Nick Taylor here. So if I set this and said, okay, I want to get up to half the field on Nick Taylor here, so I wanted 7%, what's probably going to happen is I'm going to get an alert that says, we can't match those exposures. There's no lineups with Nick Taylor in the pool. If this happens, the best thing you can do is click Keep Editing and then rebuild a new set of lineups, which will rebuild a set of lineups using what we have inputted so far to this process as a baseline, as a foundation for that next build. We'll get a little more Nick Taylor, we'll probably get a little more Cantlay, we'll get a little less Aberg, and we can start this iterative process of kind of rebuilding, rerunning the contest sim, re-diversifying, and moving from there. So this process here is a little bit of balancing, looking at your current exposures, also looking at your pool exposures while looking at your leverage to kind of fine-tune and dial in until you're satisfied with your lineups. Now, just to wrap up this point, as a SaberSim coach here, I always get questions from people asking how much should they be making these kinds of adjustments here? And it's a complicated question to answer because on one hand, I don't want to send the message to anybody that you can't be successful playing golf DFS if you're not going in and researching and making a bunch of other adjustments to players and things like that. I don't make a lot of adjustments like that slate to slate, and I'm a successful golf DFS player, and I generally tend to take the approach to instead trust the Sims, play a diversified portfolio of high upside lineups, and play within my bankroll and play strong contests to make sure that I give myself time to achieve my profit over the course of the year. With that said, there are tons of very sharp golf DFS minds in the industry that give great information every week, and you can add some value by making adjustments to your player exposures and applying some of your research. It's also, frankly, more of a fun way to play DFS to at least leave some of your mark on your build by taking a couple stands on a given player for that particular slate. Now, as we start to wrap up here, I do want to circle back to a couple things I mentioned at the start of this video, mostly related to the news that breaks throughout a slate. The first one being withdrawals. So a handful of times throughout the year, there will be slates where a golfer, perhaps a prominent golfer on a given slate, will withdraw from the tournament. They won't be playing anymore. If you play that player in your DFS lineups, you're going to get a 0. It's always a good idea to check back the night before a slate locks. Most of the time, these slates are going to be very early in the morning on Thursday, and make sure that nobody's withdrawn. You can go in and check and see if players in your entries file have since been ruled out. If this red lightning bolt is turned red, it means that your entries file for a particular golfer is that there's a golfer that's out. You'll want to rebuild in that particular case. I typically, just as the season goes along and I run my first builds, will check to see if any golfers have a questionable tag, which means typically that golfer is going through an injury or just has some other reason why they may not be golfing that week, and particularly check back to see if that golfer is planning on playing there the night before the tournament. If you are serious about golf DFS and you're getting significant action down on a slate, it's probably best practice to wake up early to make sure you're checking back that 10-15 minutes before lock and no very last second news has broken that you need to be aware of. Again, this is not something that'll happen even most slates, but it does happen a few times a year, and you can get burned if a golfer at the very last second, maybe they're warming up, tweaks their back or something like that, and they're not going to play that week. On that note, as we go through the season and we do end up in a situation where more golfers are questionable heading into weeks, I generally choose to be pretty conservative with questionable golfers in general. There are a lot of golfers in the pool. It's very easy for any given golfer to miss the cut on a given week anyway. A lot of times, I'm going to lean on the side of Xing out players that I think have an injury risk, especially if I know I'm not going to be around at 3:30 in the morning to check to see if that golfer is for sure playing in the morning. I generally take the conservative approach. I think questionable golfers and golfers withdrawing from a slate, especially ones that have a non-zero chance to do so, can hurt you quite a bit more than playing them can help you in a given tournament. So I typically choose to, the way I kind of think about it is there are probably hundreds of thousands of possible profitable lineups for a given golf slate. I'll just choose to play the ones that don't contain the questionable golfer. Now, finally, the last little bit of news or strategy I want to talk about here is weather in golf DFS. Weather is a particularly unique part of golf DFS in particular because it introduces correlation into a sport that otherwise doesn't have any. You'll see there is no correlation slider on our build settings. There's not really any reason that a given golfer's performance affects another golfer's performance, but weather does introduce a little bit of that into our game, and introducing another possibility to create an edge is a valuable strategy for us to have at our disposal. The idea here is that if there is a particular time of day where the weather is going to be worse than other times of day, golfers teeing off or playing golf during that time period are going to be more in a position to be affected by that weather. Golfers tee off in waves in golf. So on the start of the Thursday tournament, you'll have a group of golfers that tee off in what's called the AM wave on Thursday. Those same golfers will typically be playing in the afternoon wave on Friday. So you have the Thursday morning, the Friday afternoon wave, and the Thursday afternoon and the Friday morning wave. So if there is a particular window of weather that is going to be known where the winds in particular are going to pick up, that's the big one that I like to look for, winds of 20, 25 miles an hour plus. Those golfers that are all going to be playing golf around that time probably are all basically they're all playing in a worse golfing environment than the rest of the players in the field. So they're positively correlated, I guess, with each other, but their expectation is all dropping because of that wave that they're playing in. Now, I want to mention right off the bat that this is not really a secret. In fact, I think a lot of golf DFS players and content creators are almost obsessive about the way they choose to attack weather. This is absolutely something you will see the field react to, but we also can't ignore it completely. So what I ultimately like to do is use Kevin Roth's weather dashboard. So it's rotogrinders.com/weather/PGA. I check this most weeks. I prefer to check this as late as possible on Wednesday night for assuming a Thursday start. For tomorrow, for example, this is a slate that locks in the morning. I'll have time to actually wake up and react to this. Weather is pretty inherently chaotic, and I want to make sure I have the latest news. And I typically only prefer to try to react to weather that is no more than 24 hours out. The weather reports change pretty easily. There are going to be certain slates where maybe we can count on weather just being particularly bad at a particular time on Friday at Wednesday. But really all it takes is the weather report shifting an hour or 2 hours, and the edge is kind of ruined, right? If the storm and the winds come in at the tail end of the AM wave and at the beginning of the PM wave, and it was expected to all be in the morning or all be in the afternoon, all of a sudden we've made this big change to our lineups and gotten basically nothing out of it because the weather shifted. So to summarize, for me personally, what I'm looking for when I'm building my lineups and finalizing my lineups on a Wednesday night for a tournament starting on Thursday is Kevin Roth saying there's an orange 20 to 25 mile per hour winds on the Thursday waves, basically. I'm feeling confident enough about that to make some adjustments there. Now, on Showdown, this is something you can react to every single day, and it does become a bigger part of the strategy there. So in other videos here that I'll be releasing for Showdown-specific strategy, we'll talk a little bit more about weather and how I use weather on each individual day, each individual round. But for classic slates, I'm really only reacting to the Thursday weather report and only reacting if winds are expected to be 20, 25 mile an hour plus for a given wave. Now, as you can see on this particular slate, we don't exactly have that. What we have instead is the windiest time being Friday afternoon, which is a particularly difficult time to react to, right? That's kind of the furthest away wave in this particular case that we're going to be trying to react to on normally Wednesday night. I would probably check back, I guess, on Thursday morning and see how confident we're feeling about that report. But let's just assume for the example here that the Thursday PM wave was actually when the weather was going to be really bad. Or actually, even better, let's assume Thursday AM so that it's the same wave, right? Let's say we know Thursday AM and Friday PM are going to be really bad weather. It's going to be really windy, and it's going to be more mild in the Thursday afternoon and the Friday AM waves. What do you actually do? Well, what I want to do is I want to punish the golfers that are playing in that particular wave. And there's a couple different ways we can do that over on SaberSim here. Now, there's kind of a spectrum of how strongly you want to take this stand. There's kind of an organic projection adjustment approach here that you can take, and then there's a much more rigid player pool lineup rules approach you can take. A more organic way of adjusting this would be to take each individual player playing in the morning wave, for example. So their tee time is the morning wave, and saying, I'm going to bump those projections down, say 5 to 10% for each player. So for example, we would say Colin Morikawa, for example, we're going to treat him as his projection as 95 instead, or we could go down even to something like 90 here, and we're basically punishing each player playing in this morning wave here with their projections based on the fact that they're going to be playing in a windy period of the tournament, right? It's a little bit touch and go here of what the appropriate projection adjustment is to make. I would probably start at 5%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but projections are pretty tight in golf most of the time here, especially for cut events. In this particular event, projections are a little more spread out because there is no cut, but in cut events, player projections are very close together. So 5% adjustment does make a pretty big impact. So I'd probably start with a 5% adjustment, and you could just go through and adjust each player here based on when they are teeing off. If you want to, you can even check an hourly by hourly forecast and see exactly when the winds are the worst and make those adjustments accordingly here. If you don't want to touch each individual player, you can download the player projections to your computer here. And do some Excel wizardry here to take each player that is playing in a given wave and make an adjustment to their projection, and then re-upload those as custom projections. It'll save you a little bit of time there. Now, another option you can take here is creating a grouping rule to make sure that you're not using too many players playing in a given wave in your lineups. An example of what that rule would look like here is in the lineup rules section. We could create a group rule and make an automatic rule, and tell SaberSim to use no more than 1 or 2, for example, players. We'll do 2 here for this. Actually, let's do 1. Use no more than 1 players, but we're going to set a requirement, and we're going to say that tee off before, say, maybe in this particular case, it is 11 a.m., right? So we're going to say, max 1 if we're expecting that, again, in this hypothetical example, that the Thursday AM wave is really bad along with the Friday PM wave, we could say only lineups using 1 player from that wave, so that we are playing lineups that are heavily favoring the more weather favored wave in that particular case. Another more extreme example here is just curating your player pool to remove those players in the bad wave completely. In that case, you're playing the angle more that the weather is extremely impactful, and that all golfers in that wave here are having a much harder time in the bad weather there, and you're trying to build a construction there that is very much favoring the correlative effect of the weather on that particular slate. Now, I wish I could give you a one-size-fits-all approach to dealing with weather in Golf DFS, but it really doesn't work that way, unfortunately. There are a lot of variables here. How bad is the weather expected to be? When is it actually hitting relative to when you have to enter and build your lineups? Which golfers in particular, what's the skill level of golfers overall in different waves? There are certain slates throughout the year where a lot of the best golfers, the ones that you want to play, are playing in the worst weather wave. The quality of your opponents in your DFS contests also matters. I found that more skilled golf DFS players, so higher stakes players, lineups above the $3 entry fee, are much more reactive to weather in general. It's something that these players are paying attention to and are making adjustments to their lineups for. What that means, though, is that you're often having to pay an ownership premium to roster players playing in the best weather wave. So if you're reacting to weather, you're playing more higher owned golfers. If you're playing golfers in the worst wave at these higher stakes contests, you're going to be playing lower owned golfers. Players that are at the lower stakes that aren't paying attention as much to weather, ownership is going to be a little more spread out. A lot of times you can play golfers playing in the better weather wave without having to pay any ownership punishment for those players. You get them at about the original ownership projection. This is also another good opportunity to apply some research and to do some research when there are tournaments that it looks like they're going to have significant weather concerns. Hearing what other golf DFS content creators are saying you should do with your lineups is a data point or an option to figure out how much weather is impactful on that slate, but it'll also give you a little bit of an indication of about how many people are going to be reacting to weather on a given week. So there is a little bit of a tug of war of the game theory side of how much is ownership going to change because of weather, and also how much is weather a correlative impact in your lineups. If I had to make a general statement to sum up my thoughts on weather in Golf DFS, it would be if there is a difference in waves less than 24 hours out, where one wave is going to be battling winds of 20, 25 mile an hour plus, and the other is not, it is something you should be reacting to in your lineup construction, either by adjusting player projections, setting a grouping rule, or adjusting your exposures here. So by tomorrow, for example, for this particular slate, since this is a slate I'm going to be able to build on Thursday morning for, if it looks like this Friday PM wave is still going to be a challenge with the wind, I'm going to make an adjustment to my builds. What I typically prefer to do is to do some kind of rule like this, not going so hard as eliminating all the golfers in the bad weather wave, but limiting the number of golfers that I will use in my lineups from that wave here. Now, I hope this was a helpful video to get you ready for the start of the season. And again, I'll be posting videos all year long, and especially as we start to ramp up into major season in the spring and summer for more advanced strategy and more tips on Showdown and diving a little bit deeper into some of the concepts we talked about here today. But just to sum up, remember the most important things you can do to beat golf DFS in 2024 is first, manage your expectations and understand what the variance looks like, because this is a high variance sport, and make sure you're applying strong contest selection and bankroll management principles with the DFS profit plan. Second, you want to build a pool of high upside lineups. SaberSim's tournament level simulations can be very useful for this. Then you want to take those lineups and identify the best ones to play in your contest using SaberScore, SaberSim Ultimate's contest sims, or some other way of identifying the best possible lineups. Then you want to enter a diversified portfolio of those lineups into your contests while keeping an eye on the news for weather-based correlation edges or withdrawals that affect the slate and change the lineups that you want to play. If you haven't used SaberSim before and want to check us out for the 2024 golf season, you can sign up for a free 5-day trial on our site, SaberSim.com. You can sign up on a Wednesday or Thursday, play the golf main slate, play the showdowns, and maybe stick around for an NFL slate or two on Sunday here as we head into the playoff season. I hope this was helpful. If you still have any other questions, you can always reach out to us in our Discord server or by emailing us at support@SaberSim.com. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. Good luck this season, and we'll see you soon.